One of the main concerns for any horror filmmaker is knowing how to keep their audience on edge. You can do this in a lot of ways, by showing them some creepy imagery, by being extremely violent, by making them jump. But keeping that feeling going for 90 minutes is no small feat. So how did Jeremy Saulnier craft such an effective horror film? First, he grounds us in reality. The film opens in media res with a punk rock band having to siphon gas to continue on their tour of the Pacific Northwest. We can't feel afraid for characters that we don't know or don't care about, so it's important to show us who these people are before any of them die. Green Room is essentially a siege film. We're going to be trapped in one location for most of the runtime, so Saulnier gets the sense of geography and the band's dynamics clear in our heads before anything really happens. We see how they joke, we see their passion for music in the face of indifference, and we see how that indifference makes them desperate for cash. And this desperation leads them to agree to take a gig in a skinhead club in the backwoods of Oregon. One of the complaints I hear a lot about horror films is that their characters are a bunch of fucking idiots, with less sense of self-preservation than a lobotomized frog in a pot of slowly boiling water.
We should split up. Maybe we can cover more ground that way.
Yeah, good idea.
Really?
But the members of the Ain't Rights get into trouble the same way that any real person does. You're not aware that you're heading towards disaster until you suddenly realize it's too late, and all the times you could have turned away, you didn't, and now you're trapped. Obviously, most people haven't literally been trapped in a room surrounded by neo-Nazis who want to kill them to cover up a murder you inadvertently witnessed, but the logical progression of one thing to another ending up in a bloodbath is exactly how I feel when I find myself in a bad situation. If the Ain't Rights had passed on a show at a skinhead bar, if Sam hadn't left her phone in the green room, and if the killers inside hadn't left the door unlocked, none of this would have happened. By grounding his characters in reality and showing us the chain of random events and decisions that led to this situation, we feel the net drawing in around us just as the characters do. And just as these characters aren't dim-witted morons, they're not invulnerable action heroes either. When things escalate and the band realise they have to fight their way out of here, they are hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. Now, in most movies they would crawl through the ventilation shafts, but in real life air ducts are about 6 inches wide. We find out along with the band that there will be no Hollywood contrivances coming in to save the day. They're really trapped here, and these people will do anything to keep it that way.
They're coming.
Which brings us to number 2, revealing information. Saulnier is very careful about when we see the skinheads strategizing and when we don't. Patrick Stewart's Darcy, the leader of the skinheads, is a pragmatist. He has other reasons for keeping the cops from his club. They have a drug lab under the floorboards of the green room, and before we see any violence, we see him taking steps to protect his business. The film's DP Sean Porter said, "A thriller's job is to place you in a state where you are tense but not necessarily confused. You know what's going on and where people are, which creates tension because you know they're really close to getting caught." You might think that being in the dark is more frightening, but by showing us the skinheads conspiring to cover up the murder, but only in vague terms, we get the sense that something really bad is about to happen, but we don't have enough information to second guess where the film is going. We're pretty sure that they have no intention of letting the band go, but we don't know what their plan is exactly. We're only given enough knowledge to know better than the Ain't Rights do that they're in serious danger. By the time we get to the first encounter between the two groups, the band are getting really paranoid along with us, but they don't really have a choice but to extend trust to the skinheads. We don't see the other side of the door except through the grate at the bottom. Darcy seems to be standing alone and he seems to have good intentions, at least from the band's perspective, but as soon as the door is opened a crack, we see the red-laced boots and Pat's arm is grabbed and relentlessly hacked at with a knife.
Flesh wolf.
It's a song. It means meat grinder.
The final way Saulnier sustains tension is through violence and gore. After all the build-up, the character work, the establishing of the setting, and the drip feed of sinister information, the payoff has to be explosive, loud, and shocking, and it is. The violence in Green Room hits you like a sledgehammer to the face, and every time I watch it, it still freaks me out. We see the chaos of the band fighting the skinheads through the crack in the door, and the pain on Pat's face before we see what's actually happened, so we understand the weight of this on a human level before we see the gory details. And it is certainly gory. Pat's hand seems to be half severed from his wrist and it's bleeding profusely. Then straight away we see Amber gut a skinhead with a box cutter, and from here it only gets more sudden, brutal, and savage. Saulnier said, "The way I explore it is when you have such relatable characters, such normal people on screen, the violence has to adhere to that. It's awkward and brutal and sloppy and not easily digestible, and it always has some kind of narrative purpose behind it. Every time the group leaves the Green Room, we see people die, and it's not the fun kind of blood and death you'd get in a slasher movie where the fun is seeing people get cut to pieces in interesting or amusing ways. This is painful and sad. Each time someone gets hurt or killed, it really means something. We know and like these characters, and seeing them find a way out, then realizing too late that it was either another dead end or a trap, is both frightening and tragic."
Let him bleed.
Green Room never lets up, and the more I rewatch it, the more heartbreaking it is. There's an inevitability to this maelstrom of death. Each action leads directly to another, and everyone is just trying to save their own skin, which can't end any other way but in a total bloodbath. The world and the characters feel real, the story unfolds slowly and carefully, keeping us on edge, but gives us just enough to recognize how truly doomed everyone is, and when the shit hits the fan, you really feel it. Horror can be fun or cerebral or emotional, but more than any film in the past few years, Green Room is a raw nerve of manic energy, heart-stopping violence, and above all, a masterpiece of tension.